I've been here since late March, and we've been having a pretty typical spring. Lots of unpredictable weather, but that's central Nebraska for you. Windstorms 1 minute and clear skies the next. Anyway, on May 9th, I remember the date because it was the day after a particularly bad thunderstorm that knocked out power for half an hour. I got up before sunrise to do my usual checks around the property. The pasture land here is mostly gentle hills, with a little cluster of trees on the south end near an old, dried-up creek bed. It's never been much trouble, but it's kind of spooky at night because we've had issues with coyotes skulking around. This time, though, what I found wasn't coyotes. It was about 7 in the morning, around first light, and I spotted one of our yearling heifers lying oddly near the fence line. At first, I thought maybe she was just stuck in the barbed wire. I've had that happen too many times. But as I got closer, the shape of her body looked all wrong. Like, improperly oriented, if that makes sense. Legs were twisted, but it wasn't the usual, the animal struggled in barbed wire scenario. The wire wasn't cut, and there weren't any signs of her thrashing. In fact, the ground was undisturbed, which really threw me off. I regret even thinking about it now, because it's hard to unsee. The way her ribcage sat, like someone or something had twisted it like they were wringing a dish towel, and the lips were peeled back, exposing the teeth in a way I've never seen. And I've seen all sorts of cattle injuries from mountain lions back when I was working a ranch in Colorado. This was different. It's not like there was a clean cut or a typical predator's claw marks. It was more like the flesh was separated, but the bones looked snapped at odd angles. No blood anywhere either. It was like it had been drained or it never even bled. The hide around the neck was so tight and thin, it looked almost translucent. It immediately made me think of those accounts of cattle mutilations some folks talk about. But in those stories, they usually mention surgical precision. This wasn't surgical at all. This was savage yet bizarrely unmessy. I got spooked, couldn't help it. I went back to the main barn, told the foreman I found a dead yearling that was all torn up in a weird way. He got the property's owner, and we all went back out there with a side-by-side. This time the owner brought a shotgun, more out of principle than necessity, I suppose. We found that yearling exactly how I left it. The older guys scratched their heads but chalked it up to maybe a lightning strike or some freak predator. We were about to do a closer inspection when the foreman suddenly pointed to a patch of bare ground near the fence. There were these strange impressions about the size of a man's footprint, but elongated, like if someone wore a cowboy boot but the toe was too narrow and extended somehow. Now, I've seen moose tracks, deer tracks, coyote tracks, you name it, I can usually figure it out. But these had a shape I can't easily put into words, almost like the toes on a bird, but bigger than any bird we have around here. And the stride was off. They were spaced like something with a long gait, but not consistent like a man striding across a field. We stood there all feeling kind of edgy. The owner mumbled something about Wendigo, which I'd only heard about in passing from an older friend I had up by Valentine, near the Res lands. Wendigos are something from Algonquian folklore, if I remember right. Evil, cannibal spirits or monstrous beings that roam the forests. I honestly never thought about them beyond reading a story here or there. But now, the way that carcass looked, and those footprints, I started thinking maybe the old legends have a kernel of truth. The foreman started swearing up and down that old superstitions are nonsense, but then he wouldn't stop looking at those elongated tracks. After about 5 minutes, he steered us back to the barn, acting like we'd better just let the local sheriff know. We did call the Custer County Sheriff's Office, spoke to them around noon, but they brushed it off, saying it's likely predation from a coyote or bobcat. But bobcats, in my experience, don't do things that look like that. Plus, the remains were so contorted. If it had been a bobcat or a mountain lion, you'd see distinctive bite marks, gore, tracks with claw impressions, maybe even some blood spatter. It's not like they can tidy up a kill site, and a lightning strike doesn't cause the limbs to look twisted in multiple directions, with the hide peeled away. I'm no vet, but I've seen how a steer or a heifer looks when they get hit by lightning. Burn marks, sometimes a hoof is fused, but none of that twisting business. That entire day I felt uneasy, like something was just over my shoulder, even though the yard was busy with usual chores, fixing the fence that the storms messed up, cleaning out the stalls. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I kept checking behind me, scanning the tree line, convinced I'd see some pale, gaunt creature out there. The next morning, after another round of chores, I went to check on that remains site, and it was already swarming with carrion birds. We ended up disposing of the carcass, burying it further out on the property by late afternoon. But here's the unnerving part. During the short time we left it out there, a second set of those weird footprints appeared around the kill site. We distinctly saw older prints from the day before, but new ones overlapped, circling the spot once again. And no track of a coyote or vulture or anything normal, just those elongated shapes. I'll jump to the next odd thing that happened around that same time, because it might be connected. 2 nights later, on May 11th, I was trying to sleep in the bunkhouse, and around midnight I heard this low, droning howl, not like a wolf or a coyote. It reverberated, almost like a deep moan, but with an underlying squeal. It was distant, but it echoed across the fields in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I got out of bed, looked out the little window, and saw the yard light swaying in the wind. I swear I saw a dark shape move right at the edge of the barn, but it could have been the shadow of the tractor for all I know. After that, I barely slept, and even the next day my nerves were shot. I mentioned the noise to the foreman, but he told me he'd been working these fields for 12 years and never heard anything like that. He did say that, back in 2019, there were some rumors of a strange creature up around Halsey National Forest. Locals whispering about seeing something gaunt and tall, rummaging near the campgrounds. A few weeks after those sightings, a ranch 2 miles from Halsey lost 2 calves to unexplained circumstances. The sheriff's report said likely coyote or feral dog, but the rancher insisted the remains were weirdly torn up. That was about it. No major fuss. Now that I'm living the same scenario, I can't help but think maybe it's the same thing, or at least something similar. I'm starting to wonder if we should set up game cameras or put out guard dogs. Guard dogs would probably be worthless if it really is something like a Wendigo. You hear stories about how they can mimic voices, lure people into the woods, and then they devour them. I never put much stock in that, but after seeing that yearling, my mind is not as closed off as it used to be. The owner's too cheap to invest in night vision cameras, though, so I might just buy a couple trail cams myself and hide them around the property. Something is stalking these fields at night, and I would bet money it's no ordinary predator. I know Nebraska's farmland can be lonely, and people start attributing weird occurrences to folk tales, but the physical evidence is too hard to ignore this time. Once we saw those prints, that was it for me. The weather's been pretty calm lately, but I still have a feeling there's something out there. The guys keep joking about me seeing ghosts, but none of them can explain that twisted carcass or the tracks. The local paper, the Custer County Chief, never reported anything about it. If you ask me, that's because folks just don't want to admit something unnatural might be roaming around out here. They'd rather blame normal wildlife and move on. I'm a traveling wedding planner who mostly caters to couples around Missouri, though I've done events in Arkansas and Illinois on occasion. Last Saturday, I was at the Stonehouse Farms Winery in Lee's Summit for an outdoor reception that was supposed to be this really laid-back, rustic chic affair. The ceremony had ended around 6 p.m., and we were in the middle of supper service by 7:30, right around sunset. The temperature was hovering in the low 80s, and with the sun going down, it was just about perfect outside, except for this weird, underlying tension that seemed to settle over the place right after twilight. I'd already coordinated with the caterers and the DJ to make sure the timeline was flowing correctly, so I decided to take a quick breather near the side entrance of the barn, where we had our supply closet. Typically, I love these brief moments alone to gather my thoughts, maybe check my phone for any last-minute changes. But from across the dance floor, I start noticing a group of guests whispering in hushed voices and pointing toward the thick tree line behind the vineyard. At first, I assumed maybe some local wildlife had wandered in. Deer, or maybe even a fox. That's not uncommon around there. Then I heard a couple of them saying they saw something moving low to the ground, almost slithering or crawling, near the row of hedges that separates the main property from the neighbor's farmland. It must have been a good 50 yards out, maybe more. I couldn't see anything at all at first, so I brushed it off as an overreaction. But you can't really ignore that many people looking in the same direction. Another woman, who was trying to calm her daughter, mentioned how it looked pale and lanky, almost like a person crouched down in some unnatural position. It caught me off guard because the way she was describing it didn't sound like any sort of local wildlife. I've been to Stonehouse a few times before, and I've seen raccoons, possums, even the occasional coyote on the outskirts. But the way these guests were describing it, this thing was definitely not a coyote. I went around to the DJ's booth and told him to keep the music running smoothly, but to stay alert if he noticed anything strange. I had no idea how to handle something like that. He just nodded, clearly confused, but turned the volume down a notch as if he was anticipating an announcement or something. A bit later, as the toasts were wrapping up, I saw more movement in that same area, this time from my own vantage point near the caterer's van. I swear I saw this shape that was hunched over, barely taller than the wine barrels out there, which are maybe 3.5 feet high. It looked like it was kind of gliding, but with these awkward, jerky movements. The best way I can put it is that it reminded me of a large spider or insect, the way it was shifting its limbs, but it was much bigger than any animal that should be lurking around a place like that. The strangest part was how it seemed to have no color against the shadows, almost like it was blending in, but at the same time standing out, because it was so unnaturally pale. A small group of guests who'd gone around to the side to smoke cigarettes came rushing back in, telling everybody to stay away from the perimeter. One gentleman, he looked like somebody's uncle or older cousin, mentioned that he heard a chattering sound, almost like teeth clicking rapidly. He claimed it was coming from the direction of that creature, though he only glimpsed it for a second. Meanwhile, I'm trying to juggle the wedding timeline. The bride had her father-daughter dance scheduled in 20 minutes. The cake cutting was supposed to follow right after. Plus, we still had about an hour's worth of open bar service left. The last thing I wanted was a panic that would cause the entire reception to shut down prematurely. I ended up redirecting the entire group further away from that side of the property, pushing the main festivities closer to the grapevines on the opposite side, and told everyone we were just rearranging to give more room for the dance floor. But people kept whispering about that thing. It was becoming a rumor swirling around in real time. It reminded me of that local lore about crawler-type beings that sometimes pop up in rural areas at night. I've heard whispers but always dismissed it as just another internet story. Now, I'm not so sure. At some point around 9:30 p.m., one of the venue staff came running in. He was in charge of property maintenance that night, saying he saw something slip behind the big oak near the driveway. He was absolutely shaken up, describing it as a bald-headed figure on all fours. He didn't detail the face, but he said it was definitely not a normal person or some innocent teenager messing around. He was worried enough to suggest we wrap up the outdoor portion and bring everyone inside the barn permanently. I got on the phone with the venue manager, who was off-site, and tried to explain the situation without causing a major alarm. She basically told me to keep everyone calm and maybe hint that we were changing the plan because of the weather. But it was a beautiful night. No one was going to buy that. As I was talking, I could hear the music inside the barn suddenly cut out for a moment. Someone must have knocked the cables loose in all the commotion. Then the volume came back, and I heard people screaming about flickering lights near the hedge line. I ran back out and noticed the string lights that lined the fence were indeed flickering, like something was moving through or yanking on them. Yet the area was quiet aside from a few startled guests. A bunch of them were backing away, some heading to their cars. It seemed half of them were done for the night. I can't recall the exact time, but a bit after 10 p.m., we made the official call to shift the party entirely inside for safety reasons. I remember overhearing one of the bridesmaids telling her friend how she saw long arms dragging something across the ground, and that it was the most horrifying sight she ever witnessed. Another guest was swearing up and down that it had no eyes, or maybe just black holes where the eyes should be. At that point, I started to fear that we'd have a full-blown panic, but the bride and groom themselves never actually saw it, so they tried to brush it off as some weird rumor. They just wanted to continue dancing and keep celebrating. But the mood was definitely changed. I'll admit, once the adrenaline died down, I almost questioned if I imagined the whole thing. But I keep thinking back to the way that shape moved along the ground. It wasn't scrambling like a raccoon, and it didn't amble like a deer might when startled. It was smooth yet somehow disjointed, if that makes any sense. I'd never seen anything like it, and I've been in all sorts of weird situations planning outdoor events over the years. Crazy storms, barn cats knocking over decorations, even a stray donkey wandering into a reception in Arkansas once. But never something like this. The night ended with me ushering out the stragglers a little before midnight. We cut the final dance short, partly because the newlyweds wanted to at least do a sparkler exit, but also because quite a few guests had already left, and the small crowd left behind seemed on edge. By the time the last bus was gone, there were only a few staff members and myself cleaning up. We didn't see or hear anything else at that point. Granted, we stayed pretty close to the barn's main entrance, with the floodlights on full blast. I wasn't about to wander anywhere near that tree line. It's been on my mind ever since. The rumor among a few folks there was that some local people have reported a crawler in the outskirts of Lee's Summit, or near the wooded areas heading toward Blue Springs. One staff member swore they'd heard something like this before, but never believed it until that evening. I don't know how it slipped through the usual cracks of local gossip, but now I'm kicking myself for not hearing any warnings beforehand, although that might have just made me more nervous going into an event I needed to keep under control. I hope this account is helpful for you and your YouTube channel, because I genuinely don't know what to make of it. I don't have any photographic or video evidence, unfortunately, because everyone was too freaked out to even pull out their phones in time. You know how receptions are. People are usually too busy dancing, drinking, or trying to keep their kids in line. If anybody did capture something, they sure didn't share it with me. I'll probably never look at an outdoor reception in quite the same way again. The venue has already asked me to keep quiet so we don't scare off future couples, which I sort of understand from a business standpoint. But I feel like people should know there might be something roaming around those fields at night. I'm not one to cry wolf about every strange rustle in the bushes, but this definitely wasn't a simple case of a raccoon or stray dog. I can't shake the unease that overcame so many of us who witnessed it or heard it. I've been the caretaker here at a privately owned desert compound just off Old Woman Springs Road, north of Yucca Valley, for close to 5 years now. The whole property used to be some sort of art installation retreat in the late 90s. But these days, it's mostly just me rattling around, making sure no one tries to camp out on the grounds or tag the buildings. The main compound is fenced in about 6 acres. If you move past the fence line, you're basically in open desert that stretches toward Barstow and out toward the fringes of the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center. It's a quiet place most nights, so I don't get a ton of excitement. The first thing I noticed, maybe 2 days ago, it's hard to keep track unless I check my phone calendar, were the odd flickers of light that showed up around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd been dozing off in my camper, which I keep parked near the old corrugated metal barn, for easy access to the tool shed. Normally I'm up by sunup, but that night, for whatever reason, I had a handful of mini projects that kept me awake. Then my dogs started acting jumpy. I've got 3 of them. Well, 2 are mine, and 1 sort of adopted me and never left. We were inside with the lights off to keep the place cool, and they all perked up at the same time, ears pointed toward the front door area. I heard this faint hum. At first, I thought it was my generator trying to turn on, but my generator runs pretty loudly, and this hum was softer but constant. I peeked out the window expecting to see a truck on the main road. One of my neighbors down the highway has an old army transport that rattles like crazy whenever it goes by. But there was nothing on the road, just the hush of the desert. The sky, on the other hand, that's where it got weird. I could see a shape, or rather a cluster of softly glowing orbs, kind of in a tight formation. They hovered just over the ridge toward the east side, right above the line of weather-beaten Joshua trees. I thought maybe it was the glare of something from the base, maybe an experimental craft. I've seen them test new planes out here, especially after midnight, but this was far more silent than usual. No fighter jet roaring, no helicopter thumping, just a pulsing hum. It must have been out there for a solid minute or so, shifting in place like it was balancing on an invisible pivot. The lights were distinct, bright white with faint blue edges. Then, all of a sudden, they shot downward in what I can only describe as a smooth drop, like an elevator in free fall, but with zero sound. I've got no clue if it was just illusions playing off the moonlight or what, but it looked like they disappeared behind the dark silhouette of a rocky outcropping less than a mile away. The dogs were still on edge, but I didn't feel threatened, just confused. That said, there's some old lore around these parts about weird testing programs. Locals have told me stories about black helicopters patrolling the area, especially closer to Landers and the Integratron building, which was famously tied to UFO theories back in the 60s. It wouldn't be strange to see some top-secret activity out here, though usually they cause more of a ruckus. I grab my big flashlight, the one I keep by the door. It's so bright that if you flash it at the ground in front of you, you can see the dust particles in the beam. I made my way through the side gate and ventured out into the open desert, heading toward that ridge. My footsteps crunched on the dirt, and every so often, I'd step on a creosote bush, sending up that sharp desert smell. I wasn't exactly chasing these lights. I just wanted to confirm I wasn't losing it. Every step closer, I expected to hear engines or rotor blades or something mechanical, but the night was dead quiet, except for the occasional coyote echo near the mountains. Eventually, I got to a decent vantage point. There's a particular boulder formation where I sometimes sit and watch meteor showers. It's maybe a half-mile from the compound. I climbed up carefully, sprained my ankle once a couple of years ago doing something similar, and I've been more cautious ever since. From up there, I had a clean line of sight toward the direction where the light sank. At first, I didn't see anything but could sense a presence. That's the best way I can describe it. You know how sometimes you can just feel something's out there? Like the atmosphere is a bit heavier than usual? It was like that. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the desert floor, but the place where I expected to see movement was pitch black. I didn't want to go any further since I was already out there alone in the middle of the night. After a few minutes, I switched off my flashlight to see if letting my eyes adjust would help. That's when I caught a glimmer, like a reflection or a small flash. It was out of the corner of my eye down in the lower wash. I turned to look directly at it, but it was gone. I started second-guessing myself. Was it a reflection from my own lens, or maybe a piece of junk metal out there? The area is dotted with remnants of old mining equipment, random beams of sheet metal that got left behind from the property's previous owners. Could be anything, I told myself. But then something else happened. A new set of lights blinked on. They were not up in the sky, though. They were at ground level, soft reds and oranges. Once, I did see a pair of Marines from the base do a nighttime land navigation exercise, and they had some gear that glowed faintly like that, but usually you'd hear them. They can't move that stealthily with all their gear, and they'd talk amongst themselves sometimes, even if it's just for position checks. I didn't catch a word. These lights move fast, covering ground that would have taken me triple the time to traverse, especially at night. They seemed to be floating or gliding a few feet off the desert floor, weaving between brush and scattered rocks. I don't mind telling you, I felt an unexplainable rush of anxiety. I've done caretaker jobs in a few places, outskirts of Bakersfield, near Lake Isabella, and even a short stint in Death Valley, helping maintain a remote weather station. Never have I felt so out of my depth. I called out, in case it was someone from the base or a random camper who got lost, but I got no reply. The lights continued in that weaving pattern for maybe 10 seconds. Then they just vanished, not like they faded out, more like someone hit a kill switch, and they blinked off instantly. I didn't stay out much longer because I realized I was a good ways from the compound without any real means of protection besides a hefty flashlight. By the time I got back, it was closer to 4 a.m., and my dogs were still anxious. pacing back and forth. I shut and locked the door, something I usually don't bother doing because there's rarely a reason to out here. My adrenaline was so high that I ended up making coffee at 4 in the morning just to calm myself down, which I know doesn't make sense, but sometimes the routine helps me think more clearly. The next day, I reached out to a friend of mine who works at a grocery store in Yucca Valley. He's also a bit of a sky watcher and has seen some weird stuff in the area, especially near the giant rock site in Landers. He told me that a few evenings earlier, someone mentioned seeing a triangular craft with silent propulsion flying over the horizon around 1 a.m. near the same base. People always blame the military, but that doesn't explain the phenomenon I witnessed. The hush, the pulsing, and that swift descent without any audible engine are the total opposite of what I'm familiar with when it comes to local tests. If it is military, it's definitely something next level. Later, while I was doing my normal property rounds in daylight, I found an area about a mile from the compound where the sand looked disturbed, like something heavy had set down, or maybe a group of people stomped around in a circle. No tracks leading away though, which is bizarre. Typically, footprints or tire tracks are easy to spot if you get close enough, especially after a calm night with no wind. It's almost like the footprints looped onto themselves, a disorganized swirl of scuff marks that didn't have a starting or ending point. I kept telling myself, this might just be a weird trick of the environment, but the tingling at the back of my neck hasn't gone away. At nightfall, I find myself scanning the horizon frequently. I had a conversation with the folks who own this place. They're rarely on site. I explained that we might be seeing some unusual aerial activity. They seemed a bit too dismissive, almost like they've heard it all before. Maybe they have. This compound was rumored to be a meeting place for UFO researchers back in the day. The owners never talk about it openly, but I found old flyers in one of the storage sheds referencing some conference in the early 2000s about government cover-ups out here in the Mojave. I wonder if that's all connected. There were references to sightings, even alleged contact events in places like Joshua Tree National Park or near Edwards Air Force Base. People paying good money to come out here and do sky watches, hoping to see something. But you never expect to have a close brush with it yourself, you know? And I can't shake the feeling that what I saw wasn't a straightforward craft. Or if it was, it's definitely beyond typical technology. The ground-level lights especially, I can't logically place. Why would they be scanning the desert floor in silent mode, then blink out like that? There's a high chance it was something more advanced, or maybe not from any standard program. I'm aware that regularly, government or private contractors run tests all around these parts. If you look back at the history of black projects in Southern California, they often cloak them behind the idea that it's just helicopter drills or routine exercises. But that night didn't feel routine at all. If it was a typical black op, wouldn't there be at least the faint rumble of some engine or the presence of a ground crew? The hush is what's so unnerving. Even stealth drones have some kind of whirring noise. This was like complete silence except for the initial humming I heard. I'm still trying to figure out how that's possible. The reason I'm sharing this with you is that I can't shake how real it felt and how out of place this activity was. I've had my share of weird desert experiences, strange footprints that seem to appear then vanish, lights that seem to flicker in the distance, but this incident surpasses any of that. If it's truly a government black ops program, they're leaps and bounds beyond what most of us realize is possible. And if it's something else entirely, I'm not sure I want to know the ramifications. I'm the main organizer for the West Union Heritage Festival here in Doddridge County, West Virginia, which just wrapped up its final night on Saturday, June 24th. That's always a big day for us because the fireworks show is kind of the highlight. Kids running around with glow sticks, local vendors staying open until the last spark in the sky, and families claiming their spots hours beforehand on the courthouse lawn. We had clear skies, just a few drifting clouds, and I was relieved because we'd had some rain earlier in the week. Around 9:45 p.m., the fireworks launched from the old fairgrounds behind the municipal building. It was a pretty standard show. The red, white, and blue bursts, a few cracklers, and this new green chrysanthemum effect that was supposed to be the finale. I'm usually too preoccupied making sure everything's running smoothly to enjoy much of it. But it wasn't until the next morning that folks started coming up to me. Some pulled me aside while we were cleaning up trash near the main stage. A couple even emailed me, claiming they saw what they described as a massive winged figure flying near the fireworks. At first, I thought it had to be a big bird spooked by the explosions. We do get turkey vultures and hawks out here, sometimes even ravens that look huge against the sky. But then people began adding details that really threw me off. One vendor said it looked like a large humanoid shape with glowing eyes that were red as the flares. That's exactly how he put it, red as the flares. This gentleman's lived here his whole life, humble man. Not the type you'd peg for making up wild stories. A family from Salem, not too far away, maybe 15 minutes east, told me they thought it was a hang glider, but then they realized there aren't any hang gliding spots around West Union, and it moved in these strange arcs, not like a plane or a drone at all. The father said it was almost as if it was deliberately swooping in and out of the bursts of fireworks. I started thinking about Mothman because, let's be honest, once you hear large humanoid red glowing eyes in West Virginia, that's where your mind jumps. I have relatives in Point Pleasant, so the Mothman stories have always been in the background for me. But I never expected to hear about something like that in Doddridge County, or especially at a fireworks show. Usually, if folks claim to see something weird, it's out in the more isolated hollers, near old coal roads or by the Mark West energy sites, not right downtown during a festival with half the county watching the sky. One older lady who helps manage the 4-H barn approached me about 11 the next morning, super early, before we started the teardown of the tents. She said she got chills during the finale because she saw a figure perched atop the old clock tower on the courthouse building. She was trying to keep her eyes on it, but with the fireworks going off, she got distracted, and when she looked back, it was gone. She was still a bit shaken as she was telling me, though she tried to laugh it off, said maybe her eyes were playing tricks because she wasn't wearing her glasses. But she swore it was big, with wings folded behind its back, almost like an overgrown gargoyle. Now this is where it gets even stranger. A local officer I know casually from the Kiwanis Club told me 2 families independently flagged him down not long after the fireworks ended, claiming they'd driven around the back roads, US Route 50 is just up the way, and had seen something large flying over the tree line near Smithton. They described identical details. The silhouette was enormous and vaguely human-shaped, with pointed wings. One child in the group apparently said it looked like a giant bat person. Is that a direct quote? Maybe not, but that's what was passed on to me. The officer seemed skeptical, but said these folks weren't frantic or anything, just confused and trying to figure out what they'd seen. It's pretty typical for the festival to draw a variety of people, but we haven't had bizarre sightings like this before, not that I recall. We get at most a complaint about rowdy teens or maybe a stray dog rummaging around for scraps. The festival area is well lit, with those portable stadium lights renting from the local equipment place. So if something or someone was lurking about, you'd think more people would notice. Then again, everyone's heads were angled up at the sky for the fireworks, so if something was around, that might be the perfect time for it to slip by unnoticed. Here's another odd detail. One of the summer interns who works in the tourism office told me she was walking by the main row of vendor trucks, where they sell funnel cakes and lemon shake-ups, right as the fireworks were going off. She heard a low whoosh overhead, like something cutting the air. At first, she chalked it up to the mortar shells being launched, but then she says she realized it sounded more like an actual flap, a wing flap. Again, she's young, healthy, has decent hearing, so it stuck out to her. I mentioned I have family ties in Point Pleasant, so naturally this reminds me of the old Mothman sightings from the 60s. But we're nowhere near the TNT area, and from what I know, Mothman sightings in West Virginia are scattered but rarely reported in this region. That's not to say it couldn't be something similar, or a giant bird that folks are misidentifying, or even some random trick of light. People are seldom looking to start ghost stories around here, but they're not shy about telling you when they see something peculiar either. It's that old mountain honesty, I guess. The one other tidbit I'll mention, a friend of mine who was in charge of the stage lighting said he saw a flicker from the corner of his eye while adjusting the rear spotlight during the pyrotechnics. He told me it looked like a tall figure crouched on one of the speaker scaffolds. That's a good 15 feet off the ground, so if it really was a person, they'd have to climb up quickly and quietly, which seems risky with all the cables and wires. When he turned to look directly, it was gone, and he figured it was a shadow. But after hearing the other stories, he's wondering if it was connected. People in this area can be skeptical, or they might fully embrace local legends. I'm just the festival organizer, so I'm not an expert on these phenomena, but I've never had so many people share such similar accounts in such a tight time frame. It's the consistency that's getting me, the presence of wings, the intimidation factor, the sense that it was watching or observing, and those bright red eyes that at least 2 individuals described. This wasn't something darting around in the distance. It seems like it got close enough that you could pick out details. Like I said, I thought it would be prudent to share this with you for your YouTube channel, because you handle a lot of these odd reports and sightings. I still can't quite wrap my head around it. If there's any leftover evidence, it might come from local camera footage people took of fireworks. Sometimes folks zoom in or slow down their phone videos to catch the big bursts. Whether anything unusual shows up there, I can't say yet. I'm curious if the folks who email me about it will let me forward their footage, if they even have something shareable.